Hi fellow CNC nuts and welcome. Today's project, I'm going to be cutting some Christmas yard art. Now this is a subject I've covered in depth on other videos, so I won't be going into that. But what I want to show you is how I'm going to be setting the cutter to allow me to set the cutter to the surface of the stock and to the tabletop when I can no longer see the tabletop to do this. So come on, let's have a look. Now those of you who have watched my videos should know by now that when it comes to setting my cutter, I like to set it to the tabletop rather than the surface of the stock, so that when I cut through my material I don't scar up my spoilboard. So I'm going to go and set that right now, and I'm going to use the usual method by setting it by eye. And there we are. Cutter is just touching the spoilboard and no more. In Mach 3, I'm now going to enter a value of -18, which is the nominal thickness of my material. With this done, I can now lift my cutter. I'll just take that right out of the way. And I can now attach my stock to the table. Now that the stock's attached to the table, the problem is obvious. I can no longer see any part of my spoilboard to reset my cutter to. Fortunately, since I already have a reference sorted out, this wasn't going to be a problem at all. I've brought my cutter here to the corner and set my X and Y 0. I haven't altered any Z setting that I did previously. So the cutter is still zeroed or set with respect to the spoilboard. And I'm going to be using this as a reference. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take the cutter to some arbitrary position, or say just here, and with a pencil I'm just going to put an X on the board. Now this is a spot I've chosen that will not be cut when I'm doing my machining. So I'm just going to bring my cutter over it, and this is just going to be a reference point. I don't need to know where it is. I don't need any coordinates for it. That X is good enough. And now I'm going to bring the cutter down until it just touches the surface of the material. So now that the cutter is on the surface of the material, we need to come over to Mach 3. And as you can see here, we have a zero setting of -0.4772. Take careful note of that. That figure is important. And now that we've got it, we can hit 0. Going back over to our stock, we can now write that figure on the stock right next to our X. So how does any of this help us? Well, what we've actually done is two things. First of all, we've set our cutter to the surface of the material, and that's going to be great. That means our pockets will actually cut to the depth that we specify in our CAM software, in my case 4mm. But the second thing we've done is we've managed to calculate an accurate offset to work out exactly where the tabletop is once we're ready to do the final profile cut. So let's have another look, and I'll show you how I'm going to reset the cutter for the final cut. So once I've finished doing my first cut of the pockets for this piece of yard art, what I'm going to do is, when it asks for a tool change, I'm going to bring my cutter to an arbitrary point somewhere on the table. It doesn't even need to be on the table. I'm going to do this here, over this blank area here. And what I'm going to do is, in Mach 3, I'm going to enter the MDI command Z0. So now that the cutter is sitting at the 0 point, all I have to do in Mach 3 is enter the magic figure for the Z of minus 0.4772 that we wrote down earlier. The cutter is now back to the original setting I had before I started all this. It's now set to the surface of my spoilboard as I usually use it. When I cut through this material, it will not scar up my spoilboard, but will cut through the material. So we'll see at the end of this cut how this method works and what sort of damage I've done to the spoilboard. So now the Santa Claus has been removed from the table and I've swept it clean. I'm just looking here and I can see the merest faint line here where the cutter brushed the table. I can see some other marks here where on another project I cut out that it's just cut into the table just fractionally and no more. But other than that, I definitely can't see any marks from the Santa Claus really, and it's that did cut through the material and completely, because I was able to just lift it straight off the table once it was finished cutting. So as you can see, the process for setting that cutter is quite simple to use and works very well. If you've enjoyed this video, please remember to like it. Dude! You didn't tell us what the X was for. Ah, yes, the X, right. Okay. On a job like this here, I like to have a couple of reference points, just in case I end up with a power cut or something like this here, and the job is savable if I can reset everything back to a set reference point. Now, obviously, resetting my X and Y value to this corner here is going to be quite difficult because I haven't really got anything to line it up with. The initial setting isn't absolutely critical, but if I had to reset it, it has to be perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm just simply going to go in MDI X10 Y10, and that takes me to a point now on my stock here that I can see, and I'm just going to simply turn the router on and drill a wee hole there. Now this point's a known reference. I'm not going to have any trouble resetting my cutter into this hole and setting my X and Y coordinates. But here's where the X comes in. I can't reset the cutter to the tabletop. I have to reset it to a known point. And if I set my cutter down to the surface of the material at the point X, I can either zero it if I want to machine or continue machining the surface of this material, or I can enter this value of minus 0.4772 that we wrote down earlier, and then I'll know the cutter is zeroed to the tabletop. I don't need to remove my stock from this point, from the table, so that I can set this cutter properly. And that's the reason for putting the X there. Are you happy now? If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like it, subscribe to me on YouTube, and follow me on Google+. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys later. Cheers!